Hi, everyone, and welcome to my first ever video podcast, episode number 1, Science versus Propaganda. So many people believe that those of us who criticize the mainstream media narrative are some kind of fanatic buffoons who base their perspective on superstition and quackery. However, what they don't realize is that science is actually on our side, as it too aims to discover the truth and does not side with propaganda. So we must be very careful not to confuse true science with scientism. And scientism is a religious belief system, really, that is based on compromised research and corruption, orchestrated and paid for by our governments and mega billion-dollar industries like the Big Pharma, which arguably is now the most powerful industry on earth. So today, I'm very excited to be talking with John Blaid, an independent researcher who's been seriously scrutinizing the official COVID-19 narrative for the past 6 months now. So thank you for taking the time to talk with me, John.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So why don't we start off by talking about the term pandemic? That is the magic word that has enabled the governments to declare a state of emergency and justify their mass-scale human rights violations. Like, for example, trying to silence our freedom of speech by censorship, trying to destroy our right to peaceful assembly, right to make a living, right to breathe and move freely. So what have you found out, John? Like, is there any controversy regarding the declaration of this pandemic?
We need to go back at least 10 years to the swine flu in 2009, because back then they had one definition of a pandemic, or description, if you like, on their website, and they had that description or definition for 6 years since 2003.
Yeah.
And that description declared that a pandemic required a mass number of deaths. So a mass number of dead people had to be a reality before they could declare a pandemic. And that was up to April in 2009. 1 month later, they changed the definition, so that they cut off and just, they cut off the requirement of number of deaths. So if just one person died, they could declare a pandemic.
Wow.
So that was a big controversy, and there were a lot of critics that criticized their change on the website. But the WHO, they tried to whitewash it and said that no, it wasn't a definition, it was a description, and their definitions was in 6 phases, so like 1 to 6. But many critics don't accept that fact, because we have to remember that up to April 2009, the description of a pandemic required a mass number of deaths. 1 month later, they removed that requirement. Then 1 month after that, they declared a pandemic. So why did they have to change the so-called the description if it was just a description? Why did they felt the need to change it?
Yeah, exactly. So that was related to the swine flu.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a lot of fraud during the swine flu as well. I mean, if you go back then, a CBS news anchor called Cheryl Atkinson, she made an investigation into the swine flu. and she looked at the tests and everything. And after a couple of months, she found out that nobody had swine flu. Nobody had flu at all. And she let the world know, but the media didn't cover it.
Yeah,
you
I
can
heard
still
about
read
this.
about it today. So
yeah, John
yeah,
Rappaport has written about that extensively, hasn't he?
yeah, exactly. And she made the announcement in October of at the same year, 2009. She made that statement that nobody had the swine flu, nobody had the flu at all. And 1 month after that, in November, then the CDC came out and said that 22 million Americans had the swine flu. So,
Yeah.
Wow. So, I mean,
so we can learn
yeah.
a lot just by examining like the past pandemics, so-called pandemics, and see what was the role of the CDC and the World Health Organization then, as a kind of a premise to examining what is happening now.
Yeah, you have pretty much the same actors now as you had then. I mean, right. Fauci was at the helm back then as well. So
yeah. Okay, so this entire narrative, of course, now of this COVID-19 pandemic is based on the claim that there is a novel respiratory virus on the loose called SARS-CoV-2, and that it is a highly infectious and dangerous virus. And so, of course, this whole crisis would end if people actually found out that there is no evidence for the existence of this virus. So this is what you have been researching now in depth. So can you share with us your findings? Like, what pieces of evidence led you to discover that this SARS-CoV-2 virus does not actually exist? At least there is no proof for it.
Okay, if we go back to February and March of this year, I started to watch videos with Andrew Kaufman. And he pointed out the lack of evidence for the existence of the virus. And that piqued my interest because I remember that in 2016, Dr. Stefan Lanka disproved the existence of the measles virus in the Supreme Court in Germany. So I always had that in mind, in the back of my head. But this time, during this so-called pandemic, I started to question if the official narrative is correct or not. And when Andrew Kaufman presented his case, I just had to investigate it further.
Yeah.
And so I came across Dr. Thomas Cowan, Dr. Stefan Lanka, recent interviews with him, other people as well. Then a few months later, I started to find different viral challenges sent to different places. I think the first one was sent to Ireland, to a virus lab there. And they didn't have any record of an isolation of SARS-CoV-2. And that spurred me to investigate it even further. And today I know that there are 11 viral challenges sent out in total. And that's to countries like Ireland, UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And the response has been the same. They have no record of an isolation of SARS-CoV-2. So how can any of those countries claim that we have a pandemic, that SARS-CoV-2 that is responsible for COVID-19? How can they justify their policies when they themselves do not have any record of that virus?
Exactly. So there is this kind of gold standard for discovering a new virus, right? It's the Koch's postulates.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
and
could you
the first,
explain what that is?
yeah, sure. The postulates are, in essence, 4 logical rules that follows that. First off, you must find the organism that you're looking for in only sick people, not healthy people.
Makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And this is something that hasn't been done. The first rule of 4, hasn't been done. They only go to sick people and try to look for something, but they don't have a negative group, control group, where they see, is this particle, which they call a virus, is this particle in healthy subjects as well? Because if it is, it can't be a virus. It can't be the cause of the disease.
Exactly.
So that's the first rule. Only find the causative agent in sick people, not healthy people. And then they must extract that particle and isolate it. And that's creating even more confusion because the virologists use their own definition of isolation, not the same that you and I use. Like isolation, you and I think of like the separation from everything else. Like if you isolate a person, you put him or her on an island. But that's not what they're talking about. They look for other things. Yeah, they can take a piece of genetic material, they can put it in a cell culture, and they can grow it, and then they can expose it to different agents like antibiotics, and then they see a lot of small particles get produced, and they call that like a cytopathic effect, the creation of viruses. But the problem with that is that antibiotics can create so-called exosomes. And exosomes are identical in shape and size to what they call viruses.
Yeah.
And they don't take that into account, that the addition of antibiotics into the cell culture can cause these things. So how do they know that it is a virus when it's identical in shape and size?
Yeah, and exosomes are something that our cells naturally create. It's part of our organism, and it's not a pathological vector that is a disease-causing vector. So there's that's quite a dangerous place to be in if we are confusing a virus with something that is a naturally occurring part of our own organism.
Yeah, and you can look at it this way, like Dr. Thomas Cowan said in numerous videos. I mean, if you take a fire, a big fire, and you take a snapshot of that fire, what do you see? You see a lot of firemen. But are those firemen the cause of the fire, or are they a result of the fire?
Brilliant. Actually helping to clear out the fire.
Yeah. And that's the role of exosomes. They are the result of the disease, not the cause.
Exactly.
So when they look at these wire-like particles, well, they work from the assumption that they cause harm. But do they really?
Yeah, exactly. So are there 2 more postulates in that gold standard?
Yeah. So once you fulfilled rule number 1 and 2, then you must also introduce that particle into a healthy subject and see if it really causes any harm. Yeah. And then the 4th rule is that you must extract. Once you introduce that particle into a healthy subject, then you must extract it from that subject again and isolate it and do the same rules almost. So
So you're confirming that what you did in the first place is replicable, that it is in fact creating disease now in a healthy person. Yeah. That makes total sense to me. This sounds like science to me.
Yeah, and it's just logical rules. You can call it what you want. You can call it like postulates, but it's only logical rules.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So it's not like it's so scientific. No, it isn't. Everyone can understand these things.
Well, that's what I love about true science. To me, that is just like the curiosity of trying to discover inherent things in nature, inherent things that are already in existence. And through the scientific inquiry, through asking questions, we discover what is already in existence. And I feel like this is what's lacking completely in this so-called pandemic, is that there's a lot of so-called settled science, and we're actually not allowed to ask questions. If we do, we get censored. YouTube channels are removed, the Facebook posts get flagged and censored, and even people like Andrew Kaufman and other people who have a dissenting voice now are getting censored, and they're getting called a conspiracy theorist, although they are just asking questions like a true scientist should, right?
Yeah. I mean, science is all about questioning everything, and it's a constant questioning.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it becomes like a religion. It becomes dogmatic. You have to question everything all the time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because much of science is based also on assumptions and theories. But if those assumptions are wrong, then everything else falls.
Yeah.
And there's so many examples of this where scientists have mistaken things for one thing at one part of history, and then they discover, it was something else. Like take DNA, like junk DNA. I mean, they found DNA once upon a time, and then a part of DNA they declared was junk. But it wasn't junk. Many years later, they found out it had many important functions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I mean, they can actually look at things. They can decide it. They can label it. They can research it, put billions of dollars in research on it, and still be wrong. Yeah. And that's important to understand.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's get more into, you started on the subject of exosomes. So this is what people who've been researching terrain theory are aware of.
Yeah.
So the modern medical industry, of course, is largely based on the germ theory. And this is the idea that sickness is caused by these pathological microorganisms, and getting rid of them, destroying them, is the cure. And so most people have fully adopted their belief systems, this belief system, into their worldview. And because of this, they believe that they are just like eternal victims of germs, viruses, bad genes, and just bad luck. So this is what I see that is happening now, that people are not being encouraged to understand that sickness, there's a lot more holistic perspective onto health and sickness. So there is another perspective that's called the terrain theory. So can you tell us about this?
Terrain theory is quite simple. It's the environment that is the cause of disease. And with environment, I mean internal and external. Because we are, after all, a reflection of the outside in so many other aspects, and that's another discussion.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you think about it, if you look at a lake with much of fish and and sea life, if fish starts to become sick, what is the first thing you do? Is it to look for a virus, or do you look for environmental causes, like someone maybe put some toxic waste into the lake? Do you look for that, or do you look for the virus? So the terrain theory is like, okay, let's take a look at the toxic waste that it's being put into the lake.
Exactly.
And if you clean out that toxic waste, the fish starts to become better.
Right.
Becomes healthy again. And that's the essence of terrain theory, that it's the toxins, it's the electromagnetic fields, it's the nutrition, everything. Sleep, stress, trauma, beliefs, nocebo, placebo, so many things that affect our biochemistry.
Yeah.
Because if you follow the work of Bruce Lipton, for instance, and his biology of belief, then just belief alone can create different chemicals in your body, and that have different outcomes. So if you're negative, if you're depressed, you're gonna create those chemicals in your body, and that's gonna cause disease. We know this. It's not a controversy. It's known. I mean, if you're in a state of fear, for example, for a very long time, you create something called cortisol, and cortisol is immune suppressive. Right. And that in turn can lead to different symptoms like cancer and what have you.
Yeah. So what is happening now when, the majority of people are wearing masks? Well, here in Spain, it's mandatory. So you will be fined if you're walking around without a mask. So what is this signaling to you? That you're seeing everyone their faces covered? To me, that is a signal of threat. It's a constant signal of threat. So people are just massively producing the cortisol all the time. And I've actually, through our street activism, I've met people who've come to me and said, I know somebody who died because of fear. They wouldn't leave their homes. They had fully adopted the belief that there is a deadly virus on the loose and it can be anywhere. Anybody can spread it at any time. So this person, was in their 60s, but wouldn't leave home anymore. And after 3 months, and she was healthy to begin with, after 3 months, she died. And everyone knows she died because of fear. That was the cause.
Yeah. Yeah, fear is very potent. When we look at belief, then placebo and nocebo, we all know about the placebo effect, but many aren't aware of the nocebo effect. And the nocebo effect is the negative side of things. And it's just as powerful as placebo.
Exactly.
And it's been done studies on this, that, for example, I know of a case where a pair of twin sisters, they went to a witch doctor or something. No, I think it was a psychic. And the psychic told the sisters that they were gonna die in about 3 months. So they went into panic, and they went into a hospital, and they told the doctors and nurses, "Oh, we're gonna die in a week. We only have a week left. We're gonna die." And ironically enough, they did die on the date that the psychic said, because they believed so hard in their own best that they died.
Goodness me. Yeah. It's the power of our, perception of reality. We are actually creating our experience also based on the lens through which we are seeing everything. So if we are perceiving this world to be a bad place and our fellow human beings to be a potential killer, then, we're driving our human family on the brink of psychosis. It's a very unhealthy place to be in.
Yeah, and I think a good example to see the unhealthy thinking is look at hypochondriacs. They make themselves sick all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
exactly.
That's a perfect example of the negative belief system.
Yeah, and the terrain theory to me just totally resonates, because it's also allowing us to feel empowered in our own bodies and know that so long as we don't fill ourselves with toxicity, our inherent healing mechanism can work.
Yeah.
Like it knows that our body has intelligence and that, we have an immune system. And if there is something wrong, it means that simply our immune system is not able to fully function. We're not having a robust immune response. There's something preventing that. There's something in imbalance. And so if we clean the cellular terrain and detox ourselves, change our diet, change our internal dialogue, our psycho-spiritual response to the world, then wow, our bodies can heal very quickly, actually.
Yeah, and I would even challenge the idea of an immune system, because I don't think we have one. And that may sound very, very strange, because we've all been taught that we have an immune system. But we have to remember that the idea of an immune system is born out of the germ theory. Mm-hmm. But if the germ theory is wrong and that there are no viruses and that even bacteria don't cause harm, then what do we have? I would say that we have more of a tolerance system or health system that seeks balance at all times. Mm-hmm. So to put this into perspective a bit, let's use an analogy. If you have 2 buckets of water and you put a lot of toxins in one of the buckets of water, well, what happens? Well, the terrain becomes bad. But the life in that bucket of water may not be that much affected by it because it's just a tiny amount. But if you pour more and more toxins into the water, the life is going to be harmed. So you can't really call that system an immune system, because immunity is like you can do whatever you want and it doesn't cause anything. And that's not true. I mean, if you put enough toxins into your own body or into the water, you're going to cause harm. A perfect example, take alcohol. Yeah. You can drink alcohol and you can get used to it. And you can drink more and more alcohol, but at no point can you drink as much alcohol as you want, because if you do, you will die. So you can't be immune against alcohol, just as you can't be immune against any toxin. You can tolerate different levels of toxins. That you can do, but you can't be immune.
That's a brilliant point. And I feel like, many people, they don't realize that the conditions, the degenerative conditions and chronic illnesses in our bodies actually take some time to develop. And that it's only after a certain point that the threshold, is expressed that now we've gone into dis-ease, that the body has done everything it can to try and tolerate this increasing level of toxicity. But now we're at a loss, and basically we're fully signaling to you there's something very, very wrong. So then we get the symptoms of disease, and oftentimes people think that it just in that moment somehow, came to be, and don't realize that it could have been a procession of decades. Actually, it could have been 50 years in the making, and that simply, our bodies are so resilient that they were trying to fight it off all this time. And maybe you were feeling more fatigue and things were coming on bit by bit, but the most severe symptoms came towards the end when it was, already gone too far, kind of thing.
Yeah, and we all go through detox. We call it flu. It's not a virus, it's a detox. So if you got the flu, you should be happy, because that means that the body tries to clean itself from toxins. And the toxins does not have to be like rat poison or whatever like that. It can be whatever. It can be your own thoughts. Mm-hmm. Your own thoughts causing, creating bad chemicals.
Yeah.
It can be stress.
Yeah.
Food, water. The water you drink, if it's tap water, is probably not good. And a lot of things, lack of sleep, everything plays a role and create toxins.
Yeah.
So
totally. This is what I say as well, you know, having learned that plant medicine in the Amazon rainforest, there everything is viewed as a whole. So when I look at the seasons changing and the trees are dropping their dead leaves in order to get ready for a new cycle of life, for me, it would be insane to think that the human organism wouldn't go through a similar process. But I feel like what we've done is we've kind of pathologized a natural cycle of cleansing, which we all go through. And of course, the cleaner the terrain is, the less of the detoxing we have to do. So it makes sense that people who have a really good diet, who sleep a lot, who have a good, you know, sense of wellness and satisfaction and overall purpose in their lives, don't get the flu as much, because they don't have to go through such a deep, you know, cleansing.
Yeah, exactly. I have noticed it myself, because before I had a very toxic lifestyle. I was out partying and I was the party boy, so to speak, and I ate fast food all the time, like 7 days a week. I didn't have any understanding of nutrition or health at all, because I wasn't interested in that at that time. So I had the flu. I could have the flu like twice a year. Now I haven't had the flu in years. So I noticed the difference in lifestyle, that I don't have the flu as often as I used to be.
Yeah, same with me. And it's wonderful because it helps us feel more empowered in our lives, that the health actually can be in our own hands. And it doesn't have to be some kind of, you know, stroke of bad luck, that it has a lot to do with us. You know, we can take charge, we can make empowering decisions.
Yeah, and if we look at the germ theory, it doesn't even make sense when you really think about it. I mean, you have like 100 trillion cells in your body, but you have more bacteria than there are cells.
Yeah.
So even if just a fraction of those bacteria would cause harm, we would be dead a long time ago.
Yeah, exactly.
And same with viruses. They talk about trillions and trillions and trillions of viruses, but even a fraction of those would be harmful. We would be dead a long time ago as well. So harmful bacteria and viruses doesn't even make sense from the perspective of the germ theory.
Yeah. And wasn't it true that you know, Louis Pasteur, who is considered as like one of the fathers of germ theory, on his own deathbed said, it's not true, the terrain is everything. This is what I've read anyway.
Yeah, apparently that is so.
Yeah.
And he had to use poisons to prove that something caused harm. So when he used bacteria to prove that bacteria caused harm, then he inserted various toxins.
Wow.
But he never mentioned it to anyone. But he said, oh, you see, it causes harm. He fell ill. Yeah, but if you introduce toxins to someone, of course they're going to get ill. So.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Again, it's just logic, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, John, what would you say, like, what can we do now in this time of divide and conquer to really find unity, like as a last part of our interview here? What can we do to build bridges with each other? Have you got any advice for the listeners?
I would start focusing on what we have in common instead of what we don't have in common. And I think human rights are the one thing that unites us all. Despite our different ideologies and belief system and backgrounds and what have you, it doesn't matter. Human rights are universal. that's what unites us. So if we focus on that, I think we're going to be okay. And we need to understand what the rights are, and many of us don't do that. We haven't researched like what are our rights? Where do they come from? Is the government creating the rights for us, or are they inherent to us, like a part of creation itself?
Absolutely.
We need to understand these things, because if we don't know what our rights are or where they come from, how are we going to stand up for them? So
yeah. And we can also use the already existing documents like the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights, Article 6, consent, which declares that any medical procedure or intervention has to be based on prior, voluntary, and informed consent. And so when we understand that, for example, putting a mask on is actually a medical intervention, then we can see that forcing people to put the mask on is violating that very declaration of our human rights, the right to have consent.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think the key word there is also informed consent.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because we're not being told what are the effects of wearing a mask. And here, for example, in Andalusia, in 38 Celsius heat, what is that doing to you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then a future discussion will come, which is about the vaccine.
Yes, absolutely.
And I mean, informed consent regarding vaccines is non-existent. You can't have an informed consent today when you talk to your doctor.
Yeah.
Because they don't know anything. The only thing they know about vaccines is how to use them. That's all.
We should do another talk about that, because I'm very passionate about medical freedom and especially the topic of vaccines. So I'd like to really dive deep with you about that subject.
Yeah, sure. I'm up for it.
Yeah, great. Okay. Well, John, how can people find you? What is the best way they can find your work and get in touch with you?
Best way is through Facebook, and you can just search for John Blaid.
Yeah.
Facebook.com/John Blaid, and you'll find me there. I'm also on Steemit, and you can find me there, steemit.com/@John Blaid.
Brilliant.
I'm on other social media as well, but they are more like backup. In case I get censored on Facebook, I have other places to be on. So
yeah, that's a good plan. I think like the blade of truth, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the amazing work that you are doing. I really wish you the very best. Please keep going. We need more people like yourself doing independent research and scrutinizing all of this narrative, which is so harmful to all of us. We need to expose what's actually going on. So I really appreciate your work, John. And thank you for taking the time to chat with me today.
Yeah, sure. And I want to thank you as well for your work. I follow you and your videos, and I think they're awesome. They're awesome. You're so spot on, especially the video when you talked about rights. It really hit my heart. It was really powerful and good. So keep up the good work yourself.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, brother.
Yeah.
Okay.